In my previous video, I talked with you about a very short response to a prompt over The Eagle by Alfred Lord Tennyson. I read to you the prompt. It's right here. You can take a look at that video again for some discussion about that and about this particular response and why it's not an accurate or effective response. So in this video, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to move from the response that's not what we want into something that's getting there. Okay. So here is the new response. I've added some things to it. You'll notice it's longer, much longer. And let's go ahead and go over this. I'm going to increase the size so you can see it in the video just a little bit better. All right. So we're writing a response about The Eagle by Alfred Lord Tennyson. You'll notice that that's the first thing I mention. So that's pretty key. You want to make sure that your reader knows exactly what poem you're responding to and who the author is or who the poet is. Okay. And then the rest of the sentence says, in The Eagle, Alfred Lord Tennyson is using a moment in the life of an eagle to show nature's majesty. Well, remember from our previous activity, and there is a video on this, we analyzed this particular poem. We went through the poem and found examples of simile, personification, and alliteration, and then we wrote a thematic statement. That thematic statement is actually the very last line of this response. Nature's beauty exists even in the most basic moments. Well, I'm introducing that idea in the first sentence. So there's the word moment, and I used nature's majesty instead of nature's beauty so that I wasn't being too terribly repetitive in my writing. And there's another reason I used that word too, and we'll get to that in a moment. But this is kind of like a sandwich. So I start out with the thematic idea on either end of it, and everything else inside of it is the extras that you want on your sandwich. Okay, my next sentence, Tennyson utilizes simile and personification to reinforce his idea of nature being majestic. I know that part's a little repetitive, and that's okay. We're still building a particular skill. Notice I talk about this in terms of Tennyson doing something, not the poem. The poem isn't actually doing anything. It's the poet that wrote it that did something. So we want to kind of transition to that frame of mind that we're talking about what the poet did to convey a particular idea as per the prompt. What techniques or devices does the poet use? Not what does the poem use? The poem doesn't use anything. Okay. You'll notice I did a little comment on the side, and what it says there, you probably won't be able to see the comments and the example when I share this with you, so you'll want to take a look at the video for sure. These sentences together are the thesis. That is the claim that the writer is trying to prove. So I'm not trying to prove the theme. I'm trying to prove that Tennyson used simile and personification to create the theme or to convey the theme. Notice I highlighted these. Similes in green, personification is in orange. And then you'll notice that my next part of this, I talk about simile, and then a little while later, I talk about personification. So both of those come up in the text of my writing. Okay. And so what I do is I say in the last line, which seems kind of weird to kind of jump in with the last line, but that's okay. In the last line, Tennyson uses a simile, like a thunderbolt, he falls. So now I've kind of embedded, I could do better, but I've kind of embedded the text evidence into my sentence or into my writing. Notice it's not plopped down at the bottom. So I didn't write my paragraph and then drop a bunch of text evidence at the bottom. You want it to be a part of your writing so it's very clear to your reader what it is that you're trying to say. Okay. When reading this, the reader realizes that the eagle is perched far above his prey, high in a tree, You don't see that in the Thunderbolt Falls, so I would certainly want to clarify that. This is the problem with having left out alliteration in this because the conversation about alliteration and it being in the tree, that probably would have been something good to include. Okay, some people are choosing to only discuss a couple of things, but then this is kind of what's happening when you're not discussing the different techniques and you're narrowing it down to one or two, is there are certain elements that you're leaving out. Okay. Though the eagle is not resting, the reader is given the sense that he is taking in the beauty of the world that he owns as he searches for his next meal. Honestly, we don't get that from this either. Tennyson uses simile like a thunderbolt he falls. The only thing we're getting from this is that the eagle is searching for his next meal and he's found it and he's diving toward it. Okay. Now, this part you could use easily as a part of your commentary on the simile, like a thunderbolt he falls. So, like I said, the aforementioned part, that doesn't make as much sense, but this does. Tennyson's use of the thunderbolt can easily be seen as an allusion to the Greek god Zeus, who carries and uses thunderbolts as his weapons. Now I could get into this deeper conversation about this eagle being representative of something more majestic. I don't say that yet, but at least it's kind of getting to that point. So remember, I'm not showing you the exemplar, I'm showing you the we're getting there writing. Okay. An excellent illusion. Zeus is often seen as a ruthless predator, much like the eagle. I could have added that in there. One often notes that the wrinkled sea that crawls as the most prominent example of personification in the poem. When paired with the thunderbolt, the sea continues building this reference to Greek mythology, with Zeus being more powerful than the wrinkled and crawling Poseidon. Remember, I talked about this in a different video. I used the brackets to show that I changed the verb tense. The first line of the poem offers an often overlooked example of personification in the use of he and hands, giving the eagle humanity as it is perched high above the kingdom, looking out over the vast and beautiful miles it controls. Now, I'm kind of wishing that I had reorganized this and talked about personification first. Had I done that, I could have easily just switched these two around. I could have listed personification first, simile second. Then maybe that would have worked a little better for me since I did leave the alliteration part out. Or I could talk about alliteration. Who knew? Last part of this is something that a lot of people are leaving out of their writing, but this part is incredibly important. In the instant that this king-like eagle falls to capture his prey, we get the king-like because he's being compared to Zeus. The reader is brought back to the reality of the situation that the eagle is simply surviving. The sense of majesty lingers, though, leaving the reader with the understanding that, and there's our thematic statement that we wrote in the original activity, that nature's beauty exists even within the most basic moments. All right, so all of this extra stuff seems like it's extra. Like, why would I need to say all of this? Shouldn't the reader just basically understand what I'm saying just by my showing them text evidence? No, they shouldn't. And you shouldn't assume that a reader is going to be able to read your mind. So you do need to provide commentary that shows your line of thought. So, if you were a lawyer going into a trial and you were defending your client, you wouldn't say, "Here's my evidence. I think it speaks for itself. You figure out what it all means." You would actually outline your evidence and discuss it in front of the jury. Well, think of your readers as your jury. If you're not saying what it is that you mean, they're not going to have a clue what you're talking about. Okay. So, what's wrong with this piece? Well, I mentioned to you before, it did leave out a big chunk of information that made it a little confusing, especially in that we didn't talk about the fact that the eagle was perched high in a tree. We just kind of plopped that in there as though it was obvious to the reader, but we didn't show them where the eagle was perched high in the tree. The other part is it's one long paragraph. So, yes, when you were in elementary and maybe even some in middle school, it was okay to write one long paragraph. But the more you get into high school, this structure is awkward and it jumbles everything together. It makes it very difficult for the reader to honestly to even process what it is that's going on in this particular piece. I want to show you how easy it is to just simply create paragraphs. So I copied this exact piece and I put it right here. I'm not going to reread it to you, but you'll notice where it said in the last line, Tennyson uses simile. Well, that's the first line of a new paragraph. So I have a 2-sentence intro. Nothing wrong with that. I've got a body paragraph. I've got another body paragraph, and I have the conclusion. All I did was I hit enter in the right spot and I hit the tab button for indent. So you'll notice I've got my thesis as my intro. I have something that's sort of a topic sentence. I have a topic sentence, and I end, this is very important, with the thematic statement. It's important to do that because this is a thematic essay. So you want to make sure that you're re-emphasizing that particular moment. All right, my next video will be about how to turn this one into something much better.